Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is part two, technically part one, of the demonstration by Mr. Jordan Aaron Reinlieb and his Star Trek fan club entry. But here's the man of the hour and the man with the power. Now, back to Jordan.
Hello, I'm with my friend Anthony. He's graciously recording this, and this is for the Starfleet 2026 VIC. I promised a recording, and I'm going to give that because I'm not sure if I'll be able to administer a panel. So, without further ado, here we go. Since the advent of history, people always adhere to certain normal and conventional patterns. They were born, they learned to crawl, they walked, developed language, spoke, and learned to cook different types of foods. Subsequently, people created towns, villages, nations, and groups. They would go to conflict with each other over land, resources, and even different mindsets, because sometimes they didn't subscribe to a live and let live attitude. This continued unfettered until the 1950s, when the EC Comics Code encountered a great deal of resistance because of controversial graphic imagery, and unorthodox themes trying to talk about certain things. They were given a choice because they pushed the envelope. They could either water down what they were talking about, or they could or they could rebel and be rendered out of business. They chose the latter because they wanted to say something. So because of the censorship code, the EC Comics was shut down in the 1950s. But this wasn't limited to that, because there was a time, as you know, when whites and blacks had to sit in different colored areas. So what happened was, at this time, this was in 1957, Rosa Parks sat in the white section of a bus. People asked her to move, she refused. They got the police involved, and when they threatened to arrest her, she said, "You may do that." 1960, the Greensboro Four were at a diner in North Carolina. Similarly, they sat in the white section and refused to move. So because of that, they were arrested also. This was the climate that Gene Roddenberry was trying to create Star Trek in. And Gene Roddenberry reasoned that if he could set the show in the future and situate his ideas that he wanted to talk about on far-off planets with aliens, he could get it past the censors. And it actually did work. In 1964, Gene Roddenberry created a pilot called The Cage, which went very well when it was shown to the executives at NBC, but they dubbed it too cerebral. But what was unprecedented for the first time is they asked him for a second pilot, but they said, please get rid of number one, because they could not get used to the idea, mind you, this is the 1960s, of a woman that's second working side by side with men. The alien Spock, they also wanted him to jettison. And Gene Roddenberry compromised on getting rid of number one, but felt Spock represents humanity, not only getting its act together, but encountering alien life and tolerating it, accepting it. So the network said, okay, but keep Spock in the background. But the network also they were not reticent to funding, Star Trek. Remember, again, in the 1950s, Elvis was filmed from his hips up for gyrating because it was considered too risque. So at that time, then basically Gene's hands were tied. So what happened was, everyone at NBC in Desi, a woman by the name of Lucille Ball, owned, shares in Desilu. Nobody wanted to finance this pilot. Lucille Ball was the last individual that was willing to do that. She was willing to finance it. Okay, no problem. Now Gene Roddenberry has a problem because Jeffrey Hunter, one of two schools of thought. Jeffrey Hunter was embarking on a movie career, and he didn't want to be tied down by the dictates of a regular series. Sounds pretty similar, right? When Michelle Forbes was offered the role of Ro Laren on DS9, and she turned that down in lieu of a movie career. And it had to happen. Nana Visitor accepted the role of Kira Nerys on a weekly basis. What then transpired was that Gene Roddenberry had a list of people that he wanted to portray his new leading man. First was Jack Lord, who you may know as the original McGarrett on the original Hawaii Five-0. And Jack Lord was more than amenable to doing that, but he wanted over 50% ownership of the show. And at that time, even today, that's asinine. Gene Roddenberry was not going to do that. So Jack Lord basically left. Next was Lloyd Bridges, who had just come filming Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. And Lloyd Bridges told Gene Roddenberry he had watched science fiction and he didn't want to come within a mile of it. Anytime a thespian was cast in a science fiction role, they lost all credibility. Now, this might have been because a lot of science fiction in the 1950s, with the exception of The Twilight Zone and The Outer Limits, was not thought-provoking. It didn't grab you. Attack of the 50-Foot Woman, Plan 9 from Outer Space, the old 1950s horror films. Entertaining, but not really cerebral. So with that, a show called For the People had just been canceled, freeing William Shatner to accept the role of Jim Kirk. And after that, Star Trek was okay. And actually, even though it went 3 seasons, it was canceled after 2 seasons. Ironically, what happened was the fervor of the fans enabled Star Trek to be revived. A letter writing campaign way before the internet deluged NBC with tens of thousands of letters. And according to William Shatner's Star Trek Memories, there were other factors at play. A woman named Wanda had placed a whole bunch of stickers on cars, and what that did was that apparently motivated NBC to renew Star Trek, but they relegated it to the graveyard shift on Friday and Saturday nights, 3rd season. Then as in now, this was not laudable. It was like setting Star Trek up to fail, because most people are out socializing Friday and Saturday nights. They worry about tests, they worry about TV shows on Sundays. Today it's different with streaming. So anyway, Star Trek was canceled after its 3rd season. And like the Shatner, the last words are if only, okay. But what happened was Star Trek, I think, would have died in footnotes, but we had the first manned moon landing in 1969. And Neil Armstrong's words, that's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind, convinced the public, well, maybe there is something to Star Trek, maybe there is something to that. And then Star Trek took off like a rocket. And you had the first convention in 1971 where the exact number escapes me, but they only anticipated maybe 400 to 500 people, and 4,000 showed up. This meant there was really something. Star Trek continued to flourish. And then there was an animated series. And you had Shatner, Nimoy, Kelly, and Doohan, who was going to portray all the remainder of the roles, ready to go. But when Leonard Nimoy found out Walter Koenig, Nichelle Nichols, and George Takei were not included, he put his foot down and refused to participate in it until they were included. Unfortunately, they were not able to include Walter, but they included Nichelle and George. So they came to a compromise because Walter was able to contribute by suggesting dialogue in some episodes in other ways. After that, it continued to go, and the animated series was a success, leading to Star Trek Phase 2. That was an attempt where there was going to be a new Star Trek series, and Leonard Nimoy was not going to participate because after the original Star Trek, Gene Roddenberry had been marketing bloopers and pictures of Nimoy without his consent. And what happened was Nimoy felt slighted, so he refused to participate. And Phase 2 would have continued without Nimoy, but at the last minute, Roddenberry made a multi-million-dollar settlement, and Nimoy was on board. But when Close Encounters of the Third Kind was a colossal success, the network felt there was a future for Star Trek on the silver screen. And that led to the motion picture, which was pretty well cerebral, but it didn't engender the reaction a lot of people thought. So basically, I don't know, Nimoy felt bored with it. But what happened was they brought in Harve Bennett. And the long story short, without reiterating it, is that when the second Star Trek film came out, it took off like a rocket. This truly was the elements of Star Trek. This was saying things about the human condition. Even to this day, I still get emotional when we see Spock and Kirk separated and you see Spock dying. And I share a small anecdote. When I was in junior high school at the time, I actually had informed my junior high school teacher about that. And the next Monday, I looked like I came from a funeral, and he said, I don't understand it. And when I told him about Spock, he said, I just don't understand it. It's a fictional character. Why are you so upset? And I told him, you really just don't understand what Spock meant to me. Ironic, I met him 20 years later. He's a fan now, and he understands. But I think when you had the other films doing well, and the voyage home took off like a rocket, this gave birth to the next generation, and Star Trek a lot of times in some ways flourishes a lot. I'm also going to say that, what happened was when Star Trek was around, it met with a lot of resistance, and Nichelle Nichols was actually going to quit. Nichelle Nichols is going to quit after the first season. But what happened? Is it working? Yeah. Nichelle Nichols was going to quit after the first season. But what happened was she had a fundraiser to attend to that Martin Luther King was hosting. And Martin Luther King noticed how despondent she was. And he asked her what was wrong, and she reiterated how she felt being relegated to Hailing Frequencies Open was not basically in the cards for her. She felt that it was just more of the same. That Shatner and Nimoy were getting all like the top accolades, and she was being shunned. And Martin Luther King said, you can't leave, Nichelle. For the first time in society, we're seen as people that are equals and competent. We're not maids, we're not servants. And Nichelle Nichols said, how could I refuse Martin Luther King? And then they expanded her role. Even Whoopi Goldberg, as a young child, said to her mom, Ma, look, there's a lady on Star Trek and she's not a maid. Ironically, Whoopi Goldberg was going to portray Guinan in the first season of Next Generation, but the network didn't think she was serious. But the second season, it was either LeVar Burton or Patrick Stewart went to the network, and their Guinan was born. But a lot of things that happened. I mean, even in the 1960s, when Star Trek was in its first run, a lot of universities changed the starting times of courses so people could see Star Trek, which, okay, I'm glad about that. But then what happened was, after that, what happened was, it continued to take off, but also there were a lot of positive things. After Star Trek was canceled, Nichelle Nichols worked for NASA. She got people to join as astronauts. Robert Picardo was the chairman of the Interplanetary Society. Stephen Hawking and Mae Jemison were on episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation. So you have an instance, and Mae Jemison's an astronaut. This is an instance of real-life people that are actually participating in Star Trek. And what it is also is that I think a lot of people have been motivated through Star Trek. You have people that have majored in medicine and became doctors because of McCoy. They've become engineers because of Scotty, even writers maybe. I think Star Trek has encouraged a lot of people to follow their passions, adamantly and stuff like that. So I also think that that was also that. There's a lot of technological innovations that exist because of Star Trek. Some of our phones basically are advanced versions of the communicators that we've seen on TOS. They're basically the communicators with their ancestors, so to speak. With 3D printing, we can sort of replicate food to a degree. I mean, we have holographic technology now, not as advanced as in the Next Generation or even the animated series, but they still can create environments. And we have a hypo spray and we have a makeshift tricorder, certain things like that. Phasers and transporters, I think, are a little bit more far-fetched, but we'll see. But there's a lot of things like that. A lot of fans also, because of Star Trek, they've been motivated to produce their own fan films today, especially. And that can be because maybe an episode that they liked was great, but they didn't follow up on it in a sequel. Maybe they disagreed with dialogue in an episode and wanted to write their own version. Or maybe they just had an original idea for a story. But it's not just that. There's other things that shows that may not be Star Trek, but have a Star Trek flavor to them. Hercules, Xena, Sabrina the Teenage Witch, Sanctuary, and other things too. Something like The Twilight Zone and The Outer Limits were doing that well before The Cage. So yeah, the Star Trek works its way, and I've learned a lot of high vocabulary words through Star Trek. I'll give you some. Alacrity, imperative, magnanimous, abrogate. And then I've tried at times in Star Trek, even some quotes. I would try to work Star Trek quotes in all of my degree programs. When I got my associate degree at Queensborough, I wrote a paper called The Optimistic Generation of Star Trek. That was an A. Queens College in BA, I did a presentation on Risk as Our Business. That was an A. My master's degree, I wrote a paper as an elective on the Star Trek episode Obsession. And when I, in a year or so, or maybe less, do my EDS in higher ed leadership, I'll talk about the character T'Pol, and EDD I'll end with saying it's been fun. We know that. So I think also what's happened was, Star Trek, it's always been a motivating factor. It's always been something like that. I could mention a few things. Basically, let's look at it this way. A Taste of Armageddon. When Jim Kirk says to Non-7, we can admit we're killers, we're not going to... It's true. Each one of us has the capacity for violence. But if we can look at each other and give up hatred for a day, we can do it for a week, month, and a year, and in maybe 500 years have a federation. This side of paradise, man stagnates if he has no desire to be more than what they are. It's true. If you don't follow your dreams and you rest on your laurels, you die inside and you can atrophy. So you do kind of atrophy, not doing what you want, and kind of stagnate to a degree. Jean-Luc Picard, there can be no justice so long as some laws are absolute. Life sometimes is an exercise in some exceptions. You could do something wrong and by the letter of the law maybe be worthy of being arrested, but you could have a compassionate police officer that sees something noble in you and basically says community service instead of prison. So something like that. I think that there's many ways. I mean, T'Pol, for instance, the character of T'Pol that started out, her and Archer were on the opposite sides of the fence. And, Archer goes from despising T'Pol because he feels the Vulcans held back Starfleet to, hugging her at the series finale of Enterprise. I mean, there's so many things I think Star Trek has really done, and even if we're not going to, even non-Star Trek stuff, I'll give an example. I happen to be a fan of the show Victorious, and she has a great song called Make It Shine. And quoting some of the lyrics when she says, you don't have to be afraid to put your dream in action. It's true. You don't have to be afraid to be a lawyer, be a doctor, get your doctorate degree. Don't be afraid. She says other times, there are times when harder things in life make you want to run. Sometimes when adversity strikes, you want to walk away and throw in the towel, but you know deep down inside you always question if you did the noble thing. But you want it and you need it, like you have to have food. You feel a hunger inside. You feel a moral compulsion of like looking back at your life when you're 60 and saying, you know, yes, I got my degrees. Maybe I didn't win the lotto. Maybe I didn't get that house in Beverly Hills or San Jose. But I got my degrees. You had the wife, the kids. It was 80%. Like Jim Kirk, it was fun. Maybe you didn't have it all. And maybe sometimes always having something to strive for is what gives life meaning. Because if you could predict your future with certainty, would you be as motivated? Maybe the fact that you go to college and don't know if you're going to earn the degree and you have to work for it, like Jim Kirk says, maybe we weren't meant for paradise. We were meant to scratch, struggle, claw our way from the ground. Star Trek quotes a lot. I'm not going to reiterate everything. But what I'm also going to say is that if they doubt you, just believe it. It's enough to get you there. Sometimes when everyone is saying in the room, you're crazy, you shouldn't be getting that doctorate, you're crazy to go out in this weather, but you know in your heart you're doing the right thing and not hurting anybody. To be that one person in 50 that really does that is really saying something. I think Star Trek basically has been a blueprint for life. You know, when I got my master's degree in education, I was in an auditorium and I felt like Jim Kirk getting out of Starfleet Academy. It's been very motivating for me. And I really do think that it's interesting. There's been a lot of things, a lot of attitudes with Star Trek about seeing things a certain way, not judging a book by its cover, learning about life, growing, and I think that's the best thing. And basically I'm going to finish it like this. Look at Star Trek, look at Kirk, Spock, and McCoy or any other characters. You'll find yourself there somewhere. Whether you were rejected by a family member that didn't approve of your choice of career, whether you want to motivate, or whether you basically feel this desire, you have baggage in your life you're working out, and you basically come across a situation that's unwarranted, that enables you to discover who you are in life. You know, two people in class that don't get along, and the teacher has them together, forces them. At the end of the year, they're best friends. So I think what the whole point of the matter is that, I think what it is basically, I'm just going to say this to people like, okay, think of yourself as in Starfleet right now as the crew of the Enterprise. You're heading out into the unknown, not knowing what lies beyond the next beach, what lies beyond the next town, the next hill, not knowing when you encounter something, not knowing that if I make a left turn, that could be a lifelong friendship. If I make that right turn, I didn't win the lottery ticket. I think what's interesting about life is Star Trek is wrought with unpredictability and stuff like that. So I'm just going to say basically, I'm proud to be a Star Trek fan. People who want to see this is fine. I can be reached at adventure1967@yahoo.com, adventure1904@gmail.com. So on that note, I'm just going to say again, whenever you're feeling down, whenever you're feeling something like that, you're feeling you're going through conflict and stuff like that, we're all in this organization. Remember the ideals of Star Trek, as Victoria Justice says. When people doubt you, just believe it. It's enough to get you there. I'm now going to sign off, and I'm going to say thank you for doing this. Thank you for my friend Anthony for recording this. And what I'm going to say is, see you at the conference.